Store manager fires single dad. For crying baby, single mom defended him. She owned the chain. He thought he'd lost everything in front of a crowd until a stranger stood up for him and revealed she secretly controlled the entire empire. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the bustling aisles of Thompson's Market, Grace Thompson pushed her shopping cart, her 10-year-old son Daniel skipping alongside her. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the shelves stocked with everyday essentials. She'd been in countless stores just like this one across their chain, but this location held a special place in her heart. It was where her father had started the business 40 years ago. "Mom, can we get the chocolate cereal?" Daniel asked, his blue eyes sparkling with hope. "Please?" Grace smiled, running her fingers through his unruly brown hair. "You know the deal, buddy. 1 sugary cereal per month, and you already picked one last week." A baby's cry pierced the air, cutting through the usual grocery store ambient noise. Grace's head turned instinctively toward the sound. At checkout lane 3, a young man in the store's green uniform was attempting to ring up items while simultaneously reaching behind him to comfort a fussing infant in a baby carrier. "Poor little thing," Grace murmured, watching as the cashier, Ethan, according to his name tag, tried to maintain his composure while dealing with an increasingly difficult situation. "Why is the baby at the store?" Daniel asked, peering around his mother. "Sometimes parents have to bring their children to work when they don't have anyone to watch them," Grace explained softly, her heart aching with understanding. She'd been there herself, in those early days after losing Daniel's father. The baby's cries grew more intense. Ethan's movements became increasingly anxious as he attempted to scan items for an elderly customer while reaching back to gently rock the carrier. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly as he handled each item. "I'm so sorry," he kept apologizing to the customers in his line. "She's teething, and the fever just started this morning. I couldn't find a sitter in time." Most of the customers showed patience, offering understanding smiles and kind words. One even reached out to dangle her keys near the baby, trying to provide a momentary distraction. Grace found herself moving closer, pushing her cart toward that checkout lane while watching the scene unfold. The baby girl had her father's dark hair, and her tiny face was flushed with discomfort. Ethan kept glancing back at her between customers, his expression a mixture of worry and guilt. He pulled a teething ring from his pocket and carefully placed it in her reaching hands, but it only provided temporary relief. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered to his daughter. "Daddy's right here." Grace's chest tightened at the tenderness in his voice. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same one she'd worn countless times as a single parent, trying to balance work and parenthood while feeling like she was failing at both. Daniel tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, maybe we should help?" Before Grace could respond, heavy footsteps approached from the direction of the store offices. Mr. Peterson, the store manager, marched toward checkout lane 3, his face twisted in obvious displeasure. His perfectly pressed shirt and stern demeanor contrasted sharply with Ethan's disheveled appearance. "Miller," Peterson's sharp voice carried across the store. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" Ethan straightened up, his face paling. "Sir, I'm sorry, my daughter's running a fever and I couldn't—" "This is a place of business, not a daycare center," Peterson cut him off, speaking loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "We've discussed this before. You can't bring your personal problems to work." The baby's cries intensified at the harsh voice, and Ethan's hands began to shake more visibly as he tried to continue scanning items. "Please, Mr. Peterson, I just need to finish my shift. I won't be able to pay rent if—" "I don't want to hear excuses," Peterson interrupted again, his voice getting louder. "This is completely unprofessional. You're making our customers uncomfortable and disrupting the entire store." Grace felt her blood pressure rising as she watched the scene unfold. Her shopping cart sat forgotten as she observed Peterson's face growing redder with each word. Several customers had stopped to watch, some shaking their heads in sympathy for Ethan, others awkwardly looking away. "Sir," Ethan's voice cracked slightly, "I'm begging you to understand. She's all I have, and I can't afford—" "Empty your register and clock out," Peterson barked, "You're fired, effective immediately. We'll mail your final check." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the continued whimpers of the baby. Ethan stood frozen, his face a mask of devastation and disbelief. His hands gripped the edge of the checkout counter so hard his knuckles turned white. Grace felt her heart racing, anger building in her chest like a storm. She watched as Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, as he began to reach for his daughter's carrier. The injustice of it all, a father being punished for caring for his child, made her hands shake with indignation. Daniel looked up at his mother, recognizing the expression on her face. It was the same one she wore when standing up to bullies at his school or fighting for what she believed was right. "Mom?" he whispered, but Grace was already moving forward, her jaw set with determination. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder in the tense atmosphere as Peterson continued his tirade, either oblivious to or uncaring about the growing audience of shocked customers. "This is exactly why we have policies against this sort of thing. You can't expect special treatment just because." Grace couldn't stand by and watch any longer. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she stepped forward from her position in the next aisle, ready to intervene. The sight of Ethan's trembling hands as he reached for his baby girl, the defeat in his posture, and the cruel satisfaction in Peterson's expression ignited something fierce within her. The baby's cries echoed through the store's PA system, amplified by the microphone at Ethan's register. He gently rocked the carrier while trying to scan items for an increasingly impatient line of customers. His hands trembled as he passed each item over the scanner, stealing glances at his daughter Lily between beeps. "What in God's name is going on here?" Mr. Peterson, the store manager, emerged from his office, his face flushed red with anger. His polished shoes clicked against the linoleum floor as he marched toward the register, parting the line of waiting customers like a stern Moses. Ethan's shoulders hunched. "I'm sorry, sir. She's teething, and my babysitter called in sick at the last." "This is completely unacceptable," Peterson's voice boomed across the store. "This is a place of business, not a daycare center." Several customers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. The baby's cries grew louder, as if sensing the tension in the air. From 2 aisles over, Grace stopped her cart, her hand tightening on the handle as she listened. "Please, Mr. Peterson," Ethan's voice cracked. "I didn't have any other choice. I couldn't miss another shift." "You're fired," the words cut through the air like a knife. "Effective, immediately." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby customers. Ethan's face drained of color. "Sir, please, I'm begging you. I'm a single father. I need this job." "You should have thought about that before bringing your personal problems to work." Peterson crossed his arms. "Clear out your register and leave the premises immediately." Ethan's hand shook as he reached for his daughter. Lily's face was red from crying, her tiny fists balled up in distress. He fumbled with the carrier's straps, nearly dropping it in his panic. "This isn't right," a woman in line whispered to her companion. But no one stepped forward. With trembling fingers, Ethan gathered his few belongings from under the register. A small lunch bag, a worn photo of his late wife, and his name tag. Each item felt heavier than the last as he placed them in a paper bag. Customers watched in uncomfortable silence as the young father struggled to balance the bag and the baby carrier. Lily's cries had turned to hiccuping sobs, her little face pressed against her father's chest as he held her close. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he blinked them back, trying to maintain what little dignity he had left. The fluorescent lights seemed to grow harsher, spotlighting his shame as he made his way toward the exit. "Let this be a lesson," Peterson announced to the remaining employees. "This is a business, not a charity." "This is wrong." The voice cut through the tension like a thunderclap. Grace stood at the end of Register 3, her son Daniel close behind her. Her hands were shaking, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "This is absolutely wrong," she repeated, taking a step forward. The store fell silent except for Lily's whimpers. Even Peterson turned, startled by the interruption. The store manager, a tall man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood over Ethan like a stern principal about to deliver punishment. His name tag read Mr. Peterson, in bold letters that seemed to mock the power he wielded. "This is completely unacceptable, Mr. Peterson announced, his voice carrying through the store. "We can't have crying babies disrupting our business. Pack your things and leave immediately." Ethan's face crumpled as he tried to keep his composure. His hands shook as he reached for Lily, who continued to wail, her little face red with distress. "Please, sir," he said softly. "My babysitter canceled at the last minute. I had no choice. I need this job." Grace felt her heart pound against her ribs as she watched the scene unfold. Daniel tugged at her sleeve, but she couldn't look away from the injustice playing out before her. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others whispering behind their hands. "No choice?" Mr. Peterson scoffed. "There's always a choice, and you chose to bring your personal problems to work. We have standards here." That was the final straw. Grace stepped forward, her shopping cart forgotten behind her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her racing heart. "But what exactly are these standards you're talking about?" Mr. Peterson turned, startled by the interruption. "Ma'am, this is an employee matter." "No," Grace cut in, moving closer. "This is a human matter. This man is a single father trying to care for his child while holding down a job. Where's the crime in that?" Other customers began to gather, forming a loose circle around the scene. Grace could feel their attention, sense the shift in the air as they listened. "You don't understand," Mr. Peterson started, but Grace wasn't finished. "I understand perfectly," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I understand what it's like to be a single parent, trying to juggle work and childcare. I understand what it means to face impossible choices every single day." She gestured to Ethan and Lily. "Look at them. Really look. That's a father who cared enough to come to work when his childcare fell through. He could have called in sick. He could have just not shown up. Instead, he brought his baby and did his best to keep working." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the growing crowd. An elderly woman nodded vigorously, clutching her purse. A young mother with a toddler in her cart called out, "She's right!" Ethan stood frozen, holding Lily close to his chest. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, as if she too was listening to Grace's words. "What kind of message are we sending?" Grace continued, addressing the onlookers as much as Mr. Peterson. "That parents should choose between caring for their children and keeping their jobs? That bringing your child to work even in an emergency is a firing offense? Our policy clearly states," Mr. Peterson began, but his words were drowned out by more voices joining in support. "It's not right. Poor man's just trying his best. Have a heart." Grace turned to face Mr. Peterson directly, her eyes blazing with purpose. "Sometimes policies need to change. Sometimes being human needs to come before being profitable." Mr. Peterson's face had turned an uncomfortable shade of red. He straightened his tie, trying to maintain his authority despite the crowd's obvious support for Grace and Ethan. "This is none of your business, ma'am. I suggest you return to your shopping and let me handle this situation as I see fit." Grace pulled out her phone, her movements deliberate and calm. "Actually," she said, her voice lowered but still carrying clearly in the now hushed store, "I think this is very much my business." She pressed a few buttons, holding the phone to her ear while maintaining steady eye contact with Mr. Peterson. The manager waved his hand dismissively, turning back to Ethan. "Security will escort you out," he said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Grace spoke into her phone, her words measured and clear. "Yes, this is Grace Thompson. I need to discuss an urgent situation at store 47. She paused, listening. "Yes, that's correct. I'll hold." Ethan clutched Lily tighter, looking between Grace and Mr. Peterson, with confusion and the faintest glimmer of hope in his eyes. The crowd waited, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Mr. Peterson started to walk away, trying to ignore Grace's phone call, but his steps were uncertain. The atmosphere in the store had shifted dramatically from just moments ago. What had started as a simple firing had transformed into something else entirely, a stand for compassion, for understanding, for basic human dignity. Grace held her phone closer, her expression resolute. The crowd remained, watching and waiting, as if they too knew this story wasn't over yet. Daniel had moved to stand beside his mother, his young face showing pride as he watched her take this bold stand for what was right. The quiet tension in the store was broken only by Lily's occasional sniffles and the distant beeping of checkout registers. Grace's calm presence stood in stark contrast to Mr. Peterson's increasingly agitated demeanor as he realized this situation had spiraled far beyond his control. She continued to hold the phone to her ear, her other hand reaching out to give Ethan's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. The simple gesture seemed to say, "Hold on, everything is about to change." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Ethan sat on the concrete curb, gently rocking Lily in his arms. His work apron lay crumpled beside him, a painful reminder of what he'd just lost. Lily's cries had softened to quiet whimpers, but tears still rolled down Ethan's cheeks. "You and me against the world, sweetie," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. Daddy messed up again." The sound of automatic doors sliding open barely registered. Footsteps approached, but Ethan kept his head down, not wanting anyone to see him crying. A shadow fell across him, and he heard the rustle of a plastic shopping bag. "Here," a gentle voice said. "I thought you both could use some water." Ethan looked up to find Grace standing there, holding out 2 bottles of water. Her kind eyes held no judgment, only concern. Behind her stood her son, Daniel, clutching a small stuffed bear from the store's toy aisle. "Thank you," Ethan managed, accepting one of the bottles. His hands trembled as he tried to unscrew the cap. "Let me help with that," Grace offered, settling down beside him on the curb. She took the bottle, opened it, and handed it back. Daniel sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, occasionally peeking at Lily with curious eyes. "I don't usually bring her to work," Ethan explained quickly, his words tumbling out. "My regular sitter, Mrs. Martinez, she had a family emergency. I called everyone I could think of, but with such short notice." He trailed off, taking a shaky sip of water. Grace nodded, understanding in her expression. "How old is she?" 8 months, Ethan replied, managing a weak smile as Lily grabbed at his shirt with tiny fingers. "Her name's Lily." "She's beautiful," Grace said softly. "Those eyes, they're so bright and alert, just like her mother's were," Ethan whispered, then immediately tensed, as if he'd said too much. Grace seemed to sense his discomfort and didn't push. Instead, she watched as Daniel carefully placed the stuffed bear next to Lily. The baby immediately reached for it, her previous distress forgotten as she explored the soft toy with wondering hands. "Daniel picked that out for her," Grace explained. "He insisted." That's so kind," Ethan said, looking at the boy with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel." The boy smiled shyly. "I had a bear like that when I was little. Mom says it helped me feel better when I was sad." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "I don't know what I'm going to do now," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "This job, it wasn't much, but it was everything to us. The benefits covered Lily's checkups, and the schedule let me pick up odd jobs on my days off." Grace listened intently, her hands clasped in her lap. "How long have you worked here?" 6 months, Ethan replied. "Ever since the garage where I worked as a mechanic closed down. It took weeks to find this position. Who's going to hire me now, after being fired for cause?" His voice cracked on the last word. "What happened in there wasn't right," Grace said firmly. "Not by any measure of human decency." Ethan shook his head. "Mr. Peterson was just following company policy. No personal problems at work, he always says." "Some policies need to change," Grace replied, a new edge in her voice. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, turning it over in her hands for a moment before speaking again. "Mr. Miller, Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her questioningly, bouncing Lily gently as she played with her new bear. "I'm not just a regular customer," Grace began, her tone careful but direct. "My name is Grace Thompson. I'm the majority owner of Thompson Foods, including this store and the entire chain." Ethan's hand froze mid-bounce. He stared at her, uncomprehending at first, then, with dawning realization, his mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. You own?" "Yes," she confirmed quietly. "The company was my father's. He passed away 3 years ago, and I inherited his controlling share." She handed him the business card, which bore her name and title in elegant script. Ethan looked down at the card, then back at Grace, his eyes wide with disbelief. The simple white card in his hands seemed to carry the weight of impossible hope. Lily chose that moment to drop her bear, and Daniel quickly retrieved it, carefully dusting it off before returning it to her eager grasp. "But why?" Ethan started, then swallowed hard. "Why are you here, shopping in your own store?" "Because these aren't just stores to me," Grace replied, gesturing toward the building behind them. "They're communities. My father taught me that you can't lead what you don't understand. So I shop here just like everyone else. I talk to people. I see what's working and what isn't." She paused, looking directly at him. "And sometimes I see things that need to change." Ethan sat perfectly still, Lily babbling softly in his arms, as he tried to process this revelation. The kind woman who had defended him, who had sat with him in his moment of despair, wasn't just another sympathetic shopper, she was the owner of the entire chain. The reality of it seemed too surreal to grasp. "I don't understand," he finally managed. "Are you saying—" Grace's phone buzzed in her purse, and she glanced at it briefly before returning her attention to Ethan. "What I'm saying is that this situation isn't over. Not by a long shot." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "But first, I need to make a few calls. Would you mind waiting here with Daniel for a moment?" Ethan nodded mutely, still clutching her business card as if it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Grace walked a few steps away, her phone to her ear, speaking in low, determined tones. Daniel scooted closer to Ethan and Lily, watching as the baby continued to explore her new toy. "Mom always fixes things," he said, matter-of-factly, with the simple confidence of a child who had seen it happen before. "She says sometimes people forget to be kind, and someone has to remind them." Ethan looked down at the business card again, tracing the embossed letters with his thumb. Grace Thompson, CEO and majority shareholder, Thompson Foods. The woman who had appeared like a guardian angel in his darkest moment wasn't just offering sympathy, she had the power to actually change things. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Grace approached Ethan and his baby. She held 2 bottles of water from her shopping cart, her son Daniel trailing quietly behind her. Ethan quickly wiped his eyes with his sleeve, embarrassed by his tears. "Here," Grace said softly, offering him one of the bottles. "For you and little one." "Thanks, but Ethan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I appreciate what you did in there, but you shouldn't have gotten involved. I'll figure something out." Grace settled onto the curb beside him, smoothing her skirt. Daniel sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, playing with his toy car. "I'm Grace Thompson," she said, watching as Ethan carefully gave Lily tiny sips of water. "And actually, I needed to get involved." Ethan glanced at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I own this store." She paused, then added, "Well, technically, I own the whole chain. Thompson's Grocery. It's my family's business. My father started it, and I took over 5 years ago." The bottle nearly slipped from Ethan's hands. You're Miss Thompson? The owner?" Grace nodded, her expression gentle but determined. "What happened in there today? That's not what Thompson stands for. Not while I'm in charge." "I'm so sorry," Ethan stammered, trying to stand. "I never meant to cause trouble." "Please, sit." Grace touched his arm lightly. "And stop apologizing. You have nothing to be sorry for." She watched as Lily curled her tiny fingers around her father's thumb. "What's your little one's name?" "Lily," Ethan said softly. "She's usually better behaved, I swear. It's just, she's teething, and my regular sitter called in sick, and I couldn't afford to miss another shift." "How old is she?" 8 months. Grace smiled, remembering. "Daniel was a terror when he was teething. Weren't you, sweetheart?" She ruffled her son's hair, and he grinned up at her. Nothing helped except frozen washcloths and lots of cuddles. "You were a single parent too?" Ethan asked hesitantly. Grace's eyes grew distant. "Yes. Daniel's father passed away when I was 7 months pregnant. Car accident." She took a deep breath. It wasn't easy, running the business and raising him alone. But we made it work, didn't we, buddy? Daniel nodded earnestly. Mom used to bring me to board meetings in my carrier. Ethan looked surprised. Really? Really? Grace laughed. Scared the daylights out of some of our more traditional board members. But you know what? Sometimes being a parent means bringing your baby to work. Sometimes it means doing whatever it takes to provide for them while still being there for them. She turned to face Ethan directly. Tell me about your situation. Ethan bounced Lily gently as she fussed. My wife Sarah, she died last year. Car crash, like your husband. He swallowed hard. I was a mechanic then, had my own shop. But after, I just couldn't focus, made some mistakes, lost some customers, had to sell the business to pay medical bills. He shrugged, trying to hide the pain in his voice. This job was all I could find. Grace listened intently, her heart aching for him. And the manager, Tom? He knew about your situation? Yeah. He hired me 3 months ago. Said he understood about Lily, but... Ethan trailed off. But clearly, he didn't, Grace finished firmly. Well, I'm going to investigate this personally, and I want you to come back to work. Ethan shook his head quickly. Miss Thompson, I can't... Grace? She corrected. And yes, you can. We'll figure out proper accommodations for Lily. Maybe a small break room area where she can stay safely when needed. We should have done that years ago for all our parent employees. But the other workers will understand, or they'll answer to me. Grace's voice was kind but left no room for argument. Ethan, do you know what I see when I look at you? He looked down at his feet. Someone who can't keep it together? No, Grace said firmly. I see someone who loves his daughter so much he's willing to risk everything to care for her, someone who shows up and works hard despite impossible circumstances. That's exactly the kind of person we need at Thompson's. Lily chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, reaching toward Grace with pudgy hands. Grace laughed, letting the baby grab her finger. See? Lily agrees. For the first time, a small smile crossed Ethan's face. She is a good judge of character. Smart girl. Grace winked at the baby. So, what do you say? Will you let me make this right? Ethan looked at his daughter, then back at Grace. I don't want special treatment. It's not special treatment to accommodate working parents. It's good business. Grace stood up, brushing off her skirt. Take tomorrow off, paid leave, to sort out your child care. Come back Monday morning, and we'll work out the details. I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by being the excellent employee I already know you are. Grace gathered her shopping bags and took Daniel's hand. And Ethan, next time your sitter cancels, just call me directly. I mean it. As Ethan watched Grace walk to her car, Lily secure in his arms, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Grace helped Daniel into the back seat, then paused before getting in herself. She glanced up at the store's second floor, and her expression hardened slightly. Through the office window, Tom the manager stood watching, his face dark with anger. Grace stood in the elevator of Thompson's grocery headquarters, smoothing her navy blazer. The memory of Ethan's tears still fresh in her mind, she took a deep breath as the doors opened to the top floor. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the hallway leading to the boardroom. Her heels clicked against the polished marble as she walked, her father's words echoing in her memory. Lead with your heart, but never let them see it shake. She'd been repeating this mantra since his passing 3 years ago, when she inherited the majority stake in the company. The boardroom fell silent as Grace entered. 8 pairs of eyes followed her to her seat at the head of the long mahogany table. Director Harrison, a man who'd worked with her father for 20 years, cleared his throat. Grace, we've called this emergency meeting to discuss yesterday's incident, he began, his tone carefully measured. Your interference at store 127 has raised some concerns. Grace sat straighter, meeting his gaze. I wouldn't call preventing an unjust termination interference. Charles. An employee brought an infant to work. Director Peters cut in, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. It disrupted business operations. The store manager was well within policy guidelines, a policy that needs changing. Grace replied firmly. She opened her leather portfolio and distributed several documents. I've prepared some statistics on working parents in our workforce. Single parents, specifically, make up 28% of our store-level employees. This isn't about statistics, Director Morrison interrupted, his face reddening. It's about maintaining professional standards. We can't have crying babies in our stores. Grace felt her chest tighten but kept her voice steady. What we can't have is losing valuable employees because we fail to understand their struggles. Ethan Matthews is a widowed father with an excellent work record. His babysitter canceled at the last minute. So, we bend the rules whenever someone has a sad story? Harrison asked, leaning back in his chair. Grace, your heart is in the right place. But this kind of emotional decision-making? Stop right there, Grace said, holding up her hand. Let's discuss what's truly emotional here. Is it more emotional to fire a dedicated employee on the spot, causing a scene in front of customers, or to take a moment to understand the situation and find a reasonable solution? Director Chen, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. What solution do you propose? Grace pulled out another document. I've drafted an initial proposal for an emergency childcare assistance program. We have the space in most of our larger locations to create small daycare facilities. The cost would be offset by increased employee retention and productivity. Absolutely not, Morrison exploded, slapping his hand on the table. We're a grocery chain, not a babysitting service. This is exactly what we mean about emotional decisions clouding your judgment. My judgment isn't clouded, Grace responded, her voice steel-edged but calm. It's crystal clear. We have an opportunity to set ourselves apart in the industry, to show our employees and our customers that we understand modern families face modern challenges. This is about that boy, isn't it? Peters said, her voice dripping with condescension. You're a single mother yourself, Grace. Perhaps this situation hits too close to home? Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. This is about basic human dignity, Margaret. And yes, as a single mother, I understand the challenges our employees face. That's not a weakness. It's valuable insight into our workforce's needs. Harrison shuffled his papers, sighing heavily. Grace, we respect your position as majority shareholder, but the board has serious reservations about this direction. Your father built this company on solid business principles. My father, Grace interrupted, built this company on treating people right. He started with one store where he knew every employee's name and story. We've grown, but that doesn't mean we have to lose our humanity. The room fell silent. Grace stood, gathering her materials. I'm not asking for permission to reinstate Ethan Matthews. As majority owner, I've already done that. What I'm asking is for this board to work with me in creating meaningful change in our company culture. This isn't over, Morrison warned, his face dark with anger. No, Grace agreed, tucking her portfolio under her arm. It's just beginning. I expect your detailed feedback on my proposal by the end of the week. And I suggest you all visit some of our stores, not for inspections but to actually talk to our employees. You might be surprised by what you learn. She turned to leave, her hand on the doorknob when Peters called out, Your father would never have allowed this. Grace paused, looking back over her shoulder. My father taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She opened the door, stepping into the hallway with her head high. The click of the door behind her echoed in the empty corridor. Grace walked to her office, each step strengthening her resolve. The board's resistance had only confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't just about helping one father keep his job. This was about fundamentally changing how their company treated its people. She sat at her desk, looking out over the city below. Somewhere out there, Ethan was back at work, his baby safe, with a sitter she'd helped him find. It was a small victory, but only the beginning. The real work, reshaping an entire company culture, lay ahead. The morning sun warmed her face through the window as she reached for her phone. She had calls to make, allies to gather, and a battle to fight. Not just for Ethan, but for every parent trying to balance work and family under her employ. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grocery store's parking lot as Ethan pulled into his usual spot, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. In the back seat, little Lily cooed softly in her car seat, playing with her favorite stuffed giraffe. "We can do this, sweetie," he whispered, more to himself than to his daughter. "Miss Thompson believes in us." After gathering his courage and Lily's diaper bag, Ethan made his way to the employee entrance. The weight of yesterday's humiliation still hung heavy on his shoulders, but Grace's intervention had given him a second chance he couldn't waste. Sandra, the elderly cashier who'd always been kind to him, was the first to spot him. Her face lit up with a warm smile. "Welcome back, honey," she called out, waving from her register. A few customers in line turned to look, offering encouraging nods. Ethan felt his cheeks flush as he headed to the break room. This time he had permission to set up Lily's carrier in the small office adjacent to the customer service desk, a compromise Grace had arranged. The space was tight but private enough to keep Lily from disturbing customers. "Look who decided to show his face," came a sharp whisper. Mark, one of the stock boys who always sided with the manager, brushed past him deliberately. "Hope you're happy, causing all this drama." But before the words could fully sting, Jenny from Produce appeared with a bright smile. "I set up a little fan in the office," she said, gesturing to the space. "Thought it might help with white noise for the baby." The morning continued like this, a dance between support and subtle hostility. Some co-workers went out of their way to help, offering to watch Lily during Ethan's breaks or bringing him coffee. Others kept their distance, shooting wary glances when Mr. Peterson, the manager, prowled the aisles with his clipboard and perpetual scowl. During his lunch break, Ethan sat in the break room, feeding Lily her bottle. Two newer cashiers who'd been chatting fell silent when he entered, gathering their belongings quickly and leaving. The rejection stung, but he focused on Lily's bright eyes looking up at him. "Your daddy's trying his best," he whispered, wiping a drop of formula from her chin. "Just like your mama always did." The afternoon rush kept him busy at his register. Most customers seemed to have heard about yesterday's incident. Small towns had a way of spreading news fast. An elderly woman squeezed his hand after he bagged her groceries. "You're doing right by your little one," she said firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Mr. Peterson made several passes by Ethan's register, making a show of checking his drawer and timing his transactions. Each time, the manager's presence sent a ripple of tension through nearby employees. But Ethan kept his head down, focused on his work, determined not to give anyone reason to doubt Grace's decision. By closing time, exhaustion had settled deep in Ethan's bones. The emotional toll of the day weighed heavier than any physical fatigue. As he gathered Lily's things, a text message lit up his phone. "Coffee? The little cafe across the street. My treat. Grace." 15 minutes later, Ethan pushed open the cafe door, the little bell announcing their arrival. Grace sat at a corner table, already standing to help him with Lily's carrier. She looked different from yesterday, more casual in jeans and a soft sweater, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. "I ordered you a vanilla latte," she said, pulling out a chair. "I hope that's okay. I noticed the vanilla creamer in the break room had your name on it." Ethan smiled, touched by the small observation. "It's perfect, thank you. For everything, I mean. Not just the coffee." They settled into an easy conversation, both watching Lily as she dozed in her carrier. Grace spoke about her son Daniel's latest school project and how sometimes the house felt too quiet when he was at his weekend activities. "I know that quiet," Ethan said softly, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "After Sarah, my wife, after the accident, it was the silence that got to me most. Even with Lily, there's this space where Sarah's voice should be." Grace's eyes softened with understanding. "Tom, my husband, he used to sing in the shower. Terribly." She laughed, but there was a catch in her voice. "For months after he passed, I'd wake up expecting to hear that awful rendition of Sweet Caroline. Sarah couldn't cook to save her life." Ethan shared, a small smile playing at his lips. "She'd burn water if you let her. But she tried, every Sunday night. Called it her weekly kitchen adventure. The things we miss, right?" Grace said quietly. Even the imperfect things become perfect in memory. They talked about the challenges of raising children alone, the logistics of doctor appointments and school meetings, the emotional weight of being both mother and father, the guilt of never feeling quite enough. "Sometimes I look at Daniel," Grace admitted, "and I wonder if I'm doing right by him. If I'm too focused on work or not focused enough. If he needs more than I can give." Ethan nodded, gently rocking Lily's carrier as she stirred. "I worry every day that I'm messing up, that Sarah would know better what to do." But then Lily smiles, and for a moment, it feels like maybe I'm not failing completely. "You're not failing at all," Grace said firmly, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. "I saw that today. Every customer who came through your line saw it too. You're putting your daughter first. That's never failure." The cafe's lights dimmed slightly, signaling closing time. Both parents gathered their things slowly, neither quite ready to end this moment of understanding. As they stood to leave, Ethan felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the weight of his struggles had made them easier to carry. "Thank you," he said again, this time not just meaning the coffee. "It's been nice talking to someone who gets it." Grace smiled, adjusting her purse strap. "It has been. Maybe we could do it again sometime?" "I'd like that," Ethan replied, surprised by how much he meant it. Grace's heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor as she approached the boardroom. The corporate headquarters always felt cold to her, despite its modern design and expensive furnishings. She'd forgotten her coffee mug in her office, and was heading back to retrieve it when voices drifted through the partially open door of the executive conference room. "She's making us look soft," came Arnold Peterson's gravelly voice. Grace froze mid-step. This whole situation with that cashier and his crying baby is exactly why women shouldn't be running things. "The stocks have already taken a small hit," Regina Matthews added. Grace recognized the CFO's crisp tone. "Word got out about Grace's little rescue mission. Shareholders are concerned she's too emotional to lead." Grace's chest tightened, but she stood perfectly still, her back pressed against the wall beside the door. "Did you see how she defended him?" Another voice chimed in. Thomas Webb, she realized. Like some mother hen protecting her chick. "It's embarrassing." Laughter rippled through the room. Grace's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to keep listening. "We need to document everything," Regina continued. "Every decision that puts sentiment over profit. Every time she lets her bleeding heart affect policy. Build a case for the shareholders that she's unfit for leadership." "What about that initiative she's proposing?" Arnold asked. "The one about supporting working parents?" "Perfect example," Regina replied. "Calculate the costs. Show how it'll hurt our bottom line. The board won't stand for it once they see the numbers." Grace's fingers curled into fists at her sides. The familiar doubt crept in, the same doubt she'd faced when she first took over the company after her father's death. Back then, everyone had questioned whether a young widow with a small child could handle the responsibility. "My father built this company on values," she whispered to herself, so quietly that only she could hear. "On treating people like family." More laughter filtered through the door. "Values don't pay dividends," Thomas was saying. "And neither does babysitting employees' personal problems." Grace straightened her spine and walked away, her steps measured and deliberate. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing she'd heard. In her office, she gathered her things, her movements calm despite the storm brewing inside her. The drive home took longer than usual. Grace kept replaying their words in her head, each one stinging like a fresh cut. The autumn sun was setting as she pulled into her driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that usually brought her peace. Today, they just reminded her of all the sunsets she'd watched alone since losing her husband. Inside, she found Daniel sprawled on the living room floor, homework spread around him like a paper tornado. He looked up with a bright smile that instantly lightened some of the weight on her shoulders. "Mom, I got an A on my science project." He held up a paper covered in gold stars. Grace hung her coat carefully and sat down beside him on the carpet. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. The one about the solar system?" "Yeah, and guess what? I told everyone about Mr. Miller's baby and show, and tell today." Daniel's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "I said how you helped them," like a superhero. Grace's throat tightened. "Oh? What did your classmates think about that?" "Jenny said her mom works at a restaurant, and they don't let her take breaks to pump milk for her baby." Daniel's face scrunched up. "That's not fair, is it, Mom?" "No, honey. It's not fair at all." Grace ran her fingers through his hair, marveling at how children could cut straight to the heart of things. Later, after dinner and dishes, Grace followed their nighttime routine. Daniel brushed his teeth while she laid out his clothes for tomorrow. They read a chapter of his favorite book together, and she tucked the blankets around him just the way he liked. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was sleepy. "Are you going to help other parents too, like you helped Mr. Miller?" Grace kissed his forehead. "I'm certainly going to try." "Good," he mumbled, already drifting off. "You always say doing the right thing is important, even when it's hard." Grace sat on the edge of his bed for a moment longer, watching his peaceful face in the soft glow of his nightlight. Her son's simple faith in her doing the right thing made her feel stronger somehow. Standing in the doorway of his room, Grace wrapped her arms around herself. The board member's cruel words echoed in her mind, but they seemed less powerful now, overshadowed by Daniel's innocent wisdom. "This isn't just about Ethan anymore," she whispered to herself in the quiet hallway. "It's about every parent out there trying to make it work. Every mother missing her child's school play because she can't get time off. Every father choosing between a sick kid and a paycheck." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "And if they think compassion makes me weak, they don't understand what real strength island." The summer sun painted golden streaks across the parking lot of Thompson's Grocery as another busy morning began. A young mother wrestled with her shopping cart, trying to keep her toddler seated while balancing a grocery list in her other hand. She paused when she spotted Grace walking toward the store entrance, then gathered her courage and approached. "Mrs. Thompson?" The woman shifted her squirming child to her hip. "I'm Jenny Martinez. I work nights at your store on Lincoln Avenue." Grace's warm smile put Jenny at ease. "Please, call me Grace. How can I help you?" Jenny's eyes darted to the ground, then back up. "I heard about what you did for Ethan Miller, about standing up for him when he brought his baby to work." She bounced her son gently as he fussed. "I just wanted to say thank you. It means a lot to see someone like you fighting for working parents." Grace touched Jenny's arm gently. "Would you like to grab a coffee and tell me more?" Inside the store's small cafe area, other customers watched with interest as Grace sat with Jenny, listening intently. Jenny's story poured out between sips of coffee, about being a single mom, about struggling to find reliable childcare for night shifts, about supervisors who showed little understanding when emergencies arose. "Sometimes I have to choose between keeping my job and being there for my son," Jenny admitted, wiping away a tear. "It shouldn't be this hard." Before Grace could respond, another woman approached their table. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing." She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, a part-time cashier from another branch. "My husband works days while I work evenings, so we can avoid daycare costs. But when our schedules overlap," she shook her head, "we're barely hanging on." Throughout the morning, more parents found their way to Grace's table. A father who'd missed his daughter's school play because he couldn't get his shift covered. A pregnant woman worried about losing her job after maternity leave. Each story struck a chord in Grace's heart, reminding her of her own struggles raising Daniel alone. During a quiet moment, Grace pulled out her phone and started taking notes. The problems were clear: rigid schedules, insufficient leave policies, lack of emergency backup care options. But solutions were possible. She thought of how Ethan's presence had actually improved customer relations. Many shoppers appreciated seeing a father so devoted to his child. Later that afternoon, Grace visited Ethan's checkout line. The baby carrier was there, but little Lily was sleeping peacefully. Regular customers chatted with him warmly as he rang up their groceries, and Grace noticed how he'd arranged his station to keep everything within reach while staying close to his daughter. "You've created quite a stir," Grace said softly, watching him bag groceries with practiced efficiency. "In a good way." Ethan's cheeks flushed. "I heard people have been talking to you about their situations. I hope I haven't caused more trouble." "No trouble," Grace assured him. "You've opened my eyes to something important. Look around. Half our employees are parents. Half our customers too. Yet our policies act like family obligations don't exist. A young father with twins in his shopping cart nodded vigorously as he overheard them. "Amen to that," he said, unloading his groceries. "My wife and I both work retail. Planning childcare is like solving a puzzle where the pieces keep changing." Grace pulled out her notebook again. "Would you mind telling me more about that?" For the next hour, Grace moved through the store, talking with employees and customers alike. She noticed how many parents shopped with children in tow, how many workers mentioned family responsibilities when discussing their scheduling challenges. The need for change was written in every tired smile and worried glance. In her office that evening, Grace spread her notes across her desk. Daniel sat nearby, doing homework, and occasionally offering his own observations about the times she'd had to bring him to work. She began drafting a proposal: flexible scheduling options, emergency childcare partnerships, parent-friendly workstations where appropriate. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Thank you again for everything. Lily actually smiled at a customer today." Grace smiled, then began typing with renewed purpose. She would start with Ethan's store as a pilot program. Real change needed to begin somewhere, and this store, with its supportive community and dedicated staff, felt right. The board would resist. She could already hear their objections about costs and precedent, but the human cost of doing nothing was far greater. She looked at the family photo on her desk, taken years ago, when Daniel was small, and she was just learning to balance motherhood with running her father's company. The world hadn't made it easy then, but now she had the power to make it easier for others. Grace picked up her phone and called the store manager's office. "Please schedule a staff meeting for tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "We're going to try something new." The summer morning buzzed with excitement as colorful balloons danced in the breeze outside Thompson's grocery. Red and blue streamers wrapped around lampposts, and the sound of cheerful music spilled from speakers set up near the entrance. A banner stretched across the storefront reading, "Family Day at Thompson's, where every family matters." Grace stood near the entrance, greeting customers with a warm smile. She wore a casual blue sundress instead of her usual business attire, making her more approachable to the families streaming in. Her son Daniel darted between shopping carts, sporting a balloon hat shaped like a giraffe. "Mom, look what Mr. Carlos made for me," Daniel called out, pointing to the balloon artist who was creating magical shapes for a growing line of children. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Grace beamed, her heart light with joy at seeing her usually quiet store transformed into this lively celebration. Near the produce section, now decorated with bright paper chains, Ethan carefully arranged display baskets of discounted fruit. His daughter Lily sat in her carrier, contentedly gumming a teething ring. The baby wore a tiny pink dress with white polka dots, a far cry from the stressed, crying infant Grace had first encountered weeks ago. "Need any help with those apples?" Grace asked, walking over to Ethan's section. "I think I've got it," Ethan replied with a gentle smile, though Lily seems more interested in throwing them than selling them. As if on cue, the baby grabbed an apple and it rolled across the floor, making Daniel laugh as he chased after it. "I'll get it," Daniel announced proudly, retrieving the fruit and bringing it back. He made silly faces at Lily, who responded with delighted giggles. Grace watched their children interact, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "They've really taken to each other, haven't they?" "Yeah." Ethan nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's nice. Lily doesn't get to play with other kids much." The store filled steadily, with families taking advantage of the special discounts. Grace had insisted on cutting prices on essential items, despite the board's objections. She'd argued that building community goodwill would pay off in the long run, and seeing the happy faces around her proved she was right. A local face painter had set up near the dairy section, transforming children into tigers and butterflies. The balloon artist worked his magic by the bakery, where free cookies were being handed out. Even some of the more skeptical employees had gotten into the spirit, wearing party hats and helping children reach items on high shelves. "Ice cream! Ice cream!" Daniel tugged at Grace's dress, pointing to the small ice cream cart she'd hired for the day. "Why don't you take both kids?" Grace suggested to Ethan. "My treat." "Oh, I couldn't," Ethan started to protest, but Grace waved him off. Please. It makes me happy to see them happy. Ethan carefully lifted Lily from her carrier and followed an excited Daniel to the ice cream cart. Grace watched as he balanced his daughter on one hip while helping Daniel choose between chocolate and vanilla. Something about the scene made her throat tight with emotion. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and activity. Grace moved through the store, making sure everything ran smoothly, but her eyes kept finding their way back to Ethan and the children. She noticed how gentle he was with both kids, how patient in explaining things to Daniel, how tender when wiping ice cream from Lily's chin. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the store's windows, the crowd thinned out. Cleanup began, though balloon animals and face-painted children still dotted the aisles. Daniel had crashed from his sugar high and was dozing in Grace's office while Lily napped in her carrier. Grace found Ethan outside the front entrance, taking a quiet moment to himself. The sky had turned a deep orange, painting everything in soft, warm light. "Quite a day," Grace said, moving to stand beside him. "Yeah," Ethan replied softly. "Thank you. For all of this, I've never seen Lily so happy. Daniel too. He's usually such a serious little boy." Grace laughed. "Must get that from me." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the clouds pink and gold. A gentle breeze carried the last notes of music from inside the store. "You've changed everything," Ethan said suddenly, turning to face her. His eyes held an intensity that made Grace's breath catch. "Not just for me and Lily, but for everyone here. You've made this place feel like home." Grace felt the weight of his words, saw the gratitude, and something more in his expression. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. Ethan took a small step closer, and for a moment, Grace found herself swaying toward him, drawn by the warmth in his eyes. But then reality crashed back in. She was his boss. The board was already questioning her judgment, and her heart wasn't ready to risk being broken again. Grace took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should check on Daniel," she said quietly, not meeting Ethan's eyes. "Make sure the cleaning crew has everything they need." She turned and hurried inside, leaving Ethan standing alone in the fading sunlight. Her heart pounded as she walked away, wondering if she'd just made the right decision or the biggest mistake of her life. The community center's main hall buzzed with anticipation. Rows of metal chairs filled quickly as employees from all 23 Thompson's grocery stores filtered in, their name tags catching the light from above. At the front of the room, a simple podium stood beside a table draped in blue cloth, bearing stacks of papers and a pitcher of water. Grace Thompson stood in the wings, smoothing her navy blazer and taking deep breaths. Her son Daniel sat in the front row, giving her a thumbs up. Next to him, Ethan cradled little Lily, who wore a tiny dress covered in daisies. "You've got this, Mom," Daniel whispered loud enough for her to hear. The room fell quiet as Grace stepped up to the podium. Camera flashes popped from the local news crews gathered at the back. She adjusted the microphone, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "Good morning, everyone," Grace began, her voice warm and clear. "Thank you all for being here today. When my father started this grocery chain 30 years ago, he had one simple rule: treat everyone like family." She paused, looking out at the familiar faces. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of what family really means. We forgot that our employees don't just work for us, they live full lives, with joys and struggles and responsibilities that don't end when their shift begins. In the audience, a young mother bounced a baby on her knee. 2 rows back, a father in a Thompson's uniform held his sleeping toddler. Grace's eyes misted as she continued. "Today, we're bringing that family-first vision back to Thompson's Grocery. I'm proud to announce our new Parent Support Initiative, which will be implemented across all our stores." She lifted a blue folder, her voice growing stronger. "Starting next month, all Thompson's locations will offer flexible scheduling for parents of children under 12. We're installing dedicated nursing rooms in every store. Emergency child care assistance will be available when regular arrangements fall through." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Grace saw tears in some eyes, while others sat forward eagerly in their chairs. "But that's just the beginning," she continued, we're partnering with local daycare centers to offer discounted rates for employees. Parent employees will receive additional paid leave for children's doctor appointments and school events. And perhaps most importantly, we're creating a culture where no parent has to choose between being there for their child and keeping their job. The room erupted in applause. In the front row, Ethan's eyes shone with pride as he gently rocked Lily. A reporter raised her hand, and Grace nodded. Miss Thompson, won't these changes impact the company's bottom line? Grace smiled. Actually, our pilot program at Store 23 showed the opposite. When we support our working parents, employee turnover drops, productivity goes up, customer satisfaction improves. It turns out that doing the right thing is also good business. More hands shot up, but Grace held up her palm. Before I take more questions, there's someone I need to acknowledge. She turned toward the front row. Ethan Miller, would you please join me up here? Ethan's eyes widened. He carefully passed Lily to Daniel and made his way to the podium, his cheeks flushing. 3 months ago, I witnessed something that broke my heart, Grace said, her voice softening. I saw a dedicated father being punished for putting his child first. But Ethan Miller didn't just accept that injustice. His quiet courage, his unwavering dedication to his daughter, these inspired every change we're announcing today. Ethan ducked his head, but Grace continued. Sometimes it takes one person's story to open our eyes to a larger truth. Ethan showed us that being a good parent and a good employee aren't mutually exclusive. He reminded us that compassion belongs in the workplace. The audience broke into applause again. Several employees stood, starting a wave that spread across the room. Ethan's eyes glistened as he looked out at his coworkers. Thanks to Ethan's example, Grace said, thousands of working parents will now have the support they deserve. He helped us remember what it truly means to be a family-first business. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. Journalists scribbled in their notebooks while photographers captured the moment. Daniel stood in the front row, holding Lily high so she could see her father. Grace turned to Ethan, extending her hand. But instead of shaking it, he pulled her into a spontaneous hug. The crowd cheered louder, and for that perfect moment, the room overflowed with joy and possibility. As they stepped apart, Grace saw everything she'd fought for reflected in the faces before her. Hope, dignity, and the promise of a workplace where hearts and lives mattered as much as bottom lines. Her father's simple rule about treating everyone like family had found new meaning, and she knew this was just the beginning. The morning after Grace's triumphant announcement, dark clouds loomed over Thompson's grocery headquarters. Grace sat in her office, reviewing the latest sales reports, when her phone buzzed. The message made her stomach drop. Emergency board meeting. Attendance mandatory. 10 a.m. She knew this was coming. The board wouldn't let her victory stand unchallenged. At precisely 10 o'clock, Grace walked into the boardroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The long mahogany table was already surrounded by stern faces, 12 board members, all wearing identical expressions of disapproval. Miss Thompson, Bernard Wells, the board chairman, spoke first. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the fluorescent light as he shuffled through a stack of papers. We've called this meeting to address your recent decisions. Grace straightened her spine. My decisions have generated positive press and employee goodwill. Your decisions, Sandra Morton cut in, her red-lacquered nails drumming against the table, are bleeding money. These new parent-friendly policies are unsustainable. Allowing children in the workplace? Extended paid leave? On-site childcare facilities? The costs are astronomical. The costs of losing experienced employees to inflexible policies are higher, Grace countered, pulling out her own reports. Our turnover rate has already dropped. Bernard raised his hand, silencing her. The board has voted. Effective immediately. Your executive authority is suspended pending review. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. You can't do this. I'm the majority shareholder. Article 7, Section 3 of the company bylaws, Bernard said, sliding a document across the table. The board can temporarily suspend executive authority if the CEO's actions are deemed financially reckless. You'll retain your ownership shares, but operational decisions will require board approval until further notice. Grace's throat tightened as she scanned the document. They had planned this carefully, probably consulting lawyers for weeks. While she had been fighting for families, they had been plotting her removal. "And the changes I've implemented?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Sandra's smile was razor sharp. "All policy changes will be reviewed and most likely reversed. We can't let sentimentality destroy this company's profitability." Grace thought of Ethan, of all the other working parents who had finally seen hope. These aren't just policies. These are people's lives. "This is business," Bernard stated flatly. "Your father understood that. Perhaps you need time to remember it." The meeting continued, but Grace barely heard the rest. They outlined their plans to restructure her initiatives, speaking in cold corporate terms about efficiency and market realities. Each word felt like another brick in the wall they were building around her authority. When she finally left the boardroom, her assistant Jessica was waiting with worried eyes. "Miss Thompson? Mr. Miller is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Grace's heart sank further. Of course, word would have spread already. Corporate news traveled fast, especially bad news. She found Ethan pacing in her office, his face pale with distress. "Grace, I just heard. The managers got an email about the board's decision." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "This is all my fault." "Ethan! No, if I hadn't brought Lily to work that day, if you hadn't defended me." He shook his head. "I never meant to cause all this trouble." Grace stepped toward him. "You didn't cause anything. The board has always resisted change. They've been looking for an excuse. But I gave them one." Ethan pulled an envelope from his back pocket, his hands trembling slightly. "That's why I need to do this." Grace stared at the envelope, realization dawning. "Ethan, please don't." "It's my resignation," he said quietly. "Maybe if I'm gone they'll reinstate your authority. You can salvage something from this mess." "That's not the answer," Grace insisted, refusing to take the envelope. "We can fight this together." Ethan placed the envelope on her desk, his eyes full of pain and determination. "You've already lost so much because of me. Your power in the company, your father's legacy. I can't let you lose anything else. What about Lily? This job was your lifeline." "I'll figure something out." His voice cracked slightly. "I always do." Grace watched helplessly as Ethan turned and walked out of her office, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She wanted to run after him, to tell him he was making a mistake, but the words stuck in her throat. Later that evening, Grace drove home through the darkening streets. Daniel had fallen asleep in the back seat after his soccer practice, unaware of how his mother's world had crumbled that day. The streetlights blurred through her tears as she gripped the steering wheel. Everything she had built, every positive change she had fought for, was being dismantled. And now Ethan, the person who had inspired it all, was gone too. The tears fell faster as she remembered his face in the store that first day, trying so hard to comfort his crying baby while keeping his job. She had wanted to create a world where no parent had to make such impossible choices. At a red light, Grace caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her mascara had left dark tracks down her cheeks, but she didn't bother wiping them away. In the back seat, Daniel shifted in his sleep, mumbling something about his soccer game. The simple sound of his breathing reminded her of why she had started this fight in the first place. The light turned green, but Grace sat there for a moment longer, her tears falling silently in the quiet car. The morning sun barely penetrated the thin curtains of Ethan's small apartment as he methodically folded his daughter's tiny clothes. Lily sat in her playpen, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, watching her daddy with wide eyes. The apartment felt emptier with each item he packed away into cardboard boxes. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Ethan whispered, his voice catching. "Daddy messed up again." He picked up a framed photo of him and Lily at the park taken just last week when things still felt hopeful. His hands trembled as he wrapped it in newspaper. Across town, Grace sat alone in her home office, staring at spreadsheets that seemed to blur before her eyes. The board had effectively stripped her of operational control, leaving her with just a ceremonial title. The company her father had built with care and compassion was transforming into something cold and unfamiliar. Her phone buzzed with texts from store employees. "Manager's impossible to work with now. 3 more parents quit today. He's scheduling single moms for all closing shifts." Grace pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears. The manager, emboldened by the board's support, was systematically dismantling everything she'd tried to build. She thought of her father's words. "A business without heart is just a machine for making money." In his apartment, Ethan packed Lily's medical records into a folder. The local clinic had been so good with her checkups, understanding when he was late because of work. Now they'd have to start over somewhere new. His neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked softly at the door. "You're really leaving?" she asked. Her kind face creased with worry. She'd watched Lily countless times when Ethan's shifts ran late. "I have to," Ethan replied, unable to meet her eyes. "I caused too much trouble here. Miss Thompson could lose everything because of me." "That's not true," Mrs. Chen protested. "You stood for something important. We all saw it." But Ethan just shook his head, returning to his packing. The weight of failure pressed down on his shoulders. Failure to provide stability for Lily. Failure to justify Grace's faith in him. At Thompson's grocery, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Gone were the cheerful greetings and supportive environment Grace had fostered. Employees moved quickly and quietly, heads down, afraid to draw attention. The manager strutted through the aisles like a victorious general, writing up infractions for the smallest mistakes. Grace drove past the store, her heart aching at the sight of the Family First banner being taken down. Her phone rang. Daniel's school. Her son had been quiet lately, picking up on her stress. She answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Thompson?" the school counselor began. "Daniel seemed upset today. He mentioned changes at your stores?" "Yes," Grace admitted. "We're going through some adjustments." "Well, he drew this in art class. He wanted you to have it." Later that afternoon, Grace sat at her kitchen table, holding Daniel's drawing. It showed stick figures of different sizes holding hands around one of her stores. "My mom helps families," was written in wobbly letters across the top. The doorbell rang. Grace opened it to find her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, holding an envelope. "What's this?" Grace asked. "Letters," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "From families in the neighborhood. We've been talking, sharing stories about what your stores meant to us. How you helped when my grandson needed flexible hours for college. How you gave Maria from the bakery time off when her mother was sick." Grace's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes, some on proper stationery, others on notebook paper or the backs of receipts. "Remember when you let me bring my twins to work during that snowstorm?" one read. "You saved my job that day. Your store was the only place that would hire my son with his disability. You gave him dignity. When my husband died, your payment plan helped me feed my kids until the insurance came through." Grace sank into her chair, the letters spilling across her table like precious gems. Each one represented a life touched, a family supported, a moment of kindness remembered. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed her shoulder. "We haven't forgotten what you stand for, Grace. Neither should you." Grace's vision blurred as she picked up another letter, her fingers tracing the heartfelt words of support. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. The community she'd helped build was standing with her, their voices joining together in a chorus of gratitude and encouragement. She clutched the letters to her chest, feeling their weight, not of paper but of trust, of hope, of shared humanity. Her hands trembled, but for the first time in days, it wasn't from fear. It was from the surge of strength flowing through her, carried on the words of hundreds of families who remembered what real leadership looked like. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in, filling every chair and lining the walls. Grace stood at the edge of the small stage, her hands clasped tightly together. The wooden podium before her felt like both a shield and a burden. Through the crowd, she spotted familiar faces, grocery store employees, regular customers, and local families who'd shopped at her stores for years. Daniel sat in the front row, offering his mother an encouraging smile. Grace touched the simple silver cross hanging from her neck, a habit that always steadied her nerves. The room gradually quieted as she approached the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I know many of you have questions about recent events at our stores, about policies being changed, then unchanged, about promises made and seemingly broken." She paused, scanning the attentive faces before her. "But first, I want to tell you a story." In the back of the room, partially hidden behind a support column, Ethan Miller stood with little Lily nestled against his chest. He hadn't planned to come, but something had drawn him here. He gently swayed, keeping his daughter quiet as he listened. 10 years ago, I lost my husband," Grace continued, her voice catching slightly. "I found myself alone with a young son, trying to balance work and parenthood. My father owned these stores then, and he showed me something precious, that business isn't just about profits, it's about people." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several heads nodded, and Grace felt her confidence growing. "When I saw Ethan Miller being fired for bringing his baby to work, I didn't see a problem employee. I saw a father doing his absolute best. I saw myself, 10 years ago, desperate to keep everything together." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "And I knew then that we had lost our way." At the back of the room, Ethan held Lily closer, his throat tight with emotion. An elderly woman near him dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "The board says I'm too emotional, too focused on feelings instead of figures," Grace continued, squaring her shoulders. "They're right about one thing: I do lead with my heart, because my faith teaches me that compassion isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength we have." Several amens echoed from the crowd. Grace stepped out from behind the podium, moving closer to the edge of the stage. "What kind of community are we if we punish parents for loving their children? What kind of business do we run if we forget the humanity of our workers?" Her voice rose with passion. "I've been told to stick to business decisions, but I believe treating people with dignity is good business." The crowd began to stir, energy building in the room. Grace noticed several board members near the back, their expressions hard to read in the dimmed lighting. "I'm not just fighting for one employee or one store. I'm fighting for every parent who's ever had to choose between their job and their child. Every single mother or father who's felt invisible, overwhelmed, or alone." She pressed her hand to her heart. "Because I've been there, and I refuse to run a company that makes that struggle harder." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then growing. Grace raised her hands, asking for quiet. "Some people say faith and business don't mix. That compassion costs too much. But I stand here telling you the cost of losing our humanity is far greater." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice remained steady. "My father taught me that a grocery store is more than aisles and inventory. It's where communities gather, where families make memories, where kindness should live in every interaction." In the back, Ethan felt his feet moving before he realized it. Something about Grace's words, her unwavering belief in goodness, pulled him forward. Lily cooed softly against his shoulder as he made his way through the crowd. "I'm asking for your support," Grace continued. "Not just for me, but for the kind of community we want to be, the kind of example we want to set for our children." The applause started again, stronger this time. Someone shouted, "We're with you, Grace!" Others joined in, calling her name, showing their support. Grace blinked back tears as the crowd rose to their feet. The wave of support washed over her, overwhelming in its intensity. Daniel ran up to the stage, hugging her tightly. Through her tears, she saw movement in the center aisle. Ethan emerged from the crowd, Lily secure in his arms, her tiny hand waving at the lights above. The sight of them, father and daughter, the spark that had started everything, made Grace's heart swell. The chanting grew louder. "Grace! Grace! Grace!" Ethan climbed the steps to the stage, his eyes meeting Grace's. Without words, he took his place beside her, a living symbol of everything she was fighting for. Lily reached out toward Grace, smiling her toothless baby smile. The room erupted in even louder applause, the sound filling every corner of the community center. Grace looked out at the sea of supportive faces, feeling strength flow through her. With Ethan and the children beside her, she stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grocery store parking lot as people began to gather. What started as a small group of familiar faces quickly grew into a substantial crowd. Store employees, both current and former, stood shoulder to shoulder with regular customers, many holding handmade signs with messages like "Family First" and "Support Working Parents." Maria, a longtime cashier, had brought her 3 children, all wearing t-shirts they decorated with hearts and messages of support for Grace. Next to them, elderly Mr. Peterson, who'd shopped at the store every Tuesday for 20 years, sat in his wheelchair, holding a sign that read, "Grace Thompson makes us proud." The crowd parted as Ethan arrived, pushing Lily in her stroller. His eyes widened at the turnout. There must have been over 200 people already, and more were arriving by the minute. Several of his former co-workers rushed to greet him, including Jenny from the deli counter, who immediately bent down to coo at Lily. "We missed you, Ethan," Jenny said, straightening up. "It hasn't been the same since you left." News vans began pulling into the parking lot, their satellite dishes stretching toward the sky. Reporters emerged with microphones and cameras, moving through the crowd to capture interviews. The store manager peered anxiously through the front windows, phone pressed to his ear. "Look!" someone shouted, pointing down the street. Grace's silver sedan appeared, with Daniel in the passenger seat. As she parked, cameras swiveled in her direction. She stepped out, looking professional but approachable in a simple blue dress, her expression determined despite the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Daniel jumped out and immediately ran to join some friends from school who were there with their parents. Grace watched him go with a smile, then turned to face the assembled crowd. The sight nearly took her breath away. So many people had come to show their support. Several reporters surrounded her immediately, microphones thrust forward. "Mrs. Thompson, what do you say to accusations that your policies are hurting the company's bottom line? How do you respond to the board's claims that you're letting emotions override business sense?" Grace held up her hands, and the crowd quieted. "I'll answer your questions," she said clearly. "But first, I want to thank everyone who came out today. This isn't about me, it's about what kind of community we want to be." She moved through the crowd, stopping to shake hands and chat with familiar faces. When she reached Ethan and Lily, she paused. Lily reached out with chubby hands, and Grace took one of her tiny fingers with a gentle smile. "The board says we can't afford to be compassionate," Grace continued, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "I say we can't afford not to be. Every parent here knows the struggle of balancing work and family. Every child here deserves a parent who doesn't have to choose between keeping their job and being there when they're needed." Cheers erupted from the crowd. Camera flashes popped like lightning. "Our stores have always been more than just businesses," Grace went on. "They're gathering places. They're where neighbors meet and families shop together. They're part of the fabric of our community." More people were arriving now, drawn by the commotion and the news vans. The parking lot was filling up, and cars lined the street in both directions. Someone had brought a cooler of water bottles and was passing them out to the crowd. Daniel appeared at his mother's side, slipping his hand into hers. On her other side, Ethan stood with Lily, who was now contentedly chewing on her teething ring. Without planning it, they had formed a picture of exactly what Grace was fighting for: family, community, support. The photographers noticed. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment. Grace Thompson, successful businesswoman and single mother, standing united with Ethan Miller, the single father whose story had started it all. Their children beside them, surrounded by a community that refused to let compassion be labeled as weakness. "Mrs. Thompson," called out a reporter from the local newspaper, "what message do you hope this sends to the board?" Grace looked down at Daniel, then at Lily, then at all the families gathered around them. "The message is simple," she replied. "We are stronger together. Every policy I've proposed, flexible scheduling for parents, on-site childcare options, emergency family leave, these aren't just good for families, they're good for business. Happy employees make better workers. Supported parents make more loyal team members." A cheer went up from the assembled employees. Jenny from the deli wiped tears from her eyes. "But more than that," Grace continued, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot, "it's simply the right thing to do. My father taught me that business success and human compassion aren't opposites, they're partners, and I intend to prove that. More photos were being snapped. Grace kneeling to help a small child with her sign, Ethan showing Lily to her many admirers in the crowd, Daniel organizing other kids to hand out water bottles. The scene painted a picture of community in action, of people coming together to stand for something bigger than themselves. Local news reporters were already broadcasting live from the scene. "We're here at Thompson's Grocery," one reported into her microphone, "where an unprecedented show of support for owner Grace Thompson's family-friendly policies has drawn hundreds of community members." The images of Mrs. Thompson, with single father Ethan Miller, and their children, are already spreading across social media, sparking discussions nationwide about workplace fairness for working parents. The morning sun climbed higher, and still the crowd grew. Someone had set up a folding table with coffee and donuts. Children played together while their parents talked and shared stories. The atmosphere was more like a community celebration than a protest. Through it all, Grace remained centered and calm, her presence both gracious and strong. She answered questions thoughtfully, greeted supporters warmly, and kept a protective eye on all the children playing nearby. When Lily started to fuss, Grace naturally reached out to help Ethan retrieve a bottle from the diaper bag, the gesture captured by dozens of cameras. The photos that would soon flood the internet told a powerful story. Grace and Ethan side by side, their children happy and secure, surrounded by a community that believed in their cause. Each image spoke of hope, of possibility, of what could happen when people chose to stand together for what was right. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grocery store parking lot as Grace sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the board. This time, though, it wasn't a threat. It was surrender. "We hereby reinstate Miss Thompson's full authority." Grace read aloud, her voice shaking. She had to blink several times to make sure she wasn't dreaming. Daniel peered over from the passenger seat. "Mom? Are you crying?" Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Happy tears, sweetie. Very happy tears." The parking lot was already filling with supporters holding handmade signs, "Family First," and "Stand with Grace." Someone had even brought a bubble machine, sending shimmering spheres floating through the crisp morning air. Children chased them, laughing. Grace's phone rang. It was Ethan. "Did you see the news?" His voice was breathless with excitement. "The board, they're backing down." "I just got the message," Grace said, smiling through her tears. "Where are you?" "Around back. Lily's practically bouncing out of her carrier. I think she knows something good is happening." Grace laughed. "Stay there. We're coming to you." She and Daniel walked around the building, where they found Ethan pacing nervously, Lily babbling happily in her carrier. When he saw Grace, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. "They're saying the store manager's been transferred," he said. "Effective immediately." Grace nodded. "To a warehouse position. Far from any employees he can bully." Daniel tugged at Grace's sleeve. "Can I hold Lily, please?" Ethan carefully lifted his daughter from her carrier and showed Daniel how to support her head. The sight of the two children together made Grace's vision blur with fresh tears. A cheer erupted from the front of the store. Grace peeked around the corner to see more families arriving, many carrying breakfast items and thermoses of coffee. It had become an impromptu celebration. "I never thought," Ethan's voice cracked. "When I was sitting on that curb that day, feeling like the biggest failure." Grace touched his arm. "You weren't a failure. You were a father putting his child first, and now, because of you, other parents won't have to choose between their jobs and their children." They walked together to the front of the store, where the crowd broke into applause. Someone had set up a small podium with a microphone. Grace recognized several reporters from local news stations setting up cameras. "Speech!" someone called out. The crowd took up the chant. "Speech! Speech!" Grace felt her knees wobble slightly as she approached the podium. Daniel and Ethan stood beside her. Lily still cradled in Daniel's careful arms. "When I was widowed," Grace began, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet parking lot, "I thought I had to be perfect, never show weakness, never ask for help." She paused, looking at the sea of faces. "I was wrong." A murmur of understanding rippled through the crowd. "This store, all our stores, they're not just businesses, They're part of a community, and communities take care of each other. Grace's voice grew stronger. Starting today, every store in our chain will have flexible scheduling for parents. We'll have an on-site childcare program, and most importantly, we'll have compassion. The applause was deafening. Grace saw elderly couples wiping away tears, young mothers hugging their children, teenagers recording everything on their phones. None of this would have happened without one person's courage, Grace continued, turning to Ethan, a father who just wanted to take care of his little girl. Ethan ducked his head, embarrassed by the attention, but Grace could see his proud smile. A woman in the crowd called out, "What about the other stores? The other chains?" Grace's smile widened. "We're just getting started. Our success will show other businesses that treating families with respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business." More cheers erupted. Someone started singing "Stand By Me," and others joined in. The morning sun had fully risen now, warming the autumn air. Local business owners began arriving with donations, boxes of donuts, trays of coffee, even a local food truck offering free breakfast burritos. The parking lot had transformed into a community celebration. Grace stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. She felt Ethan's hand slip into hers, warm and reassuring. Daniel leaned against her other side, still carefully holding Lily. "Look," Daniel whispered, pointing to the store's entrance. The maintenance crew had just finished hanging a new banner above the doors. It read, "Family first, always." Grace squeezed Ethan's hand, watching bubbles float past in the morning light, carrying the sound of laughter and hope into the clear blue sky. The crowd's energy was infectious, not just celebration, but something deeper. It was the feeling of a community coming together, of hearts opening, of change taking root. Standing there on the store steps, surrounded by love and support, Grace finally understood. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage. A father refusing to leave his child. A woman standing up for what's right. A community finding its voice. People pressed forward to shake their hands, share stories, offer congratulations. Children darted between adults' legs, playing impromptu games of tag. The scent of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air, mixing with the sound of 100 conversations and countless laughs. Grace looked at Ethan, at their children, at the crowd of supporters. For the first time in years, she felt completely, absolutely certain. This was exactly where she was meant to be. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees at Thompson Park, scattering red and golden leaves across the playground. Grace sat on a weathered wooden bench, watching Daniel show little Lily how to collect the prettiest leaves. The sight made her heart swell. "He's really good with her," Ethan said softly, settling beside Grace. His shoulders seemed lighter these days, the constant worry lines on his forehead slowly fading. Grace nodded, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "Daniel always wanted a sister. He used to ask Santa for one every Christmas." She laughed, the sound carrying across the playground. "And Lily needed a big brother figure," Ethan added, his voice thick with emotion. After losing her mom, he trailed off, but Grace understood. The silence between them felt comfortable now, not heavy with unsaid words like before. The playground was quiet this Wednesday afternoon. Most families were still at work or school, but Grace had taken a half-day off. The store could run without her for a few hours, something she was finally learning to accept. "Remember that first day?" Ethan asked, watching Lily toddle after a particularly bright orange leaf. "When you stood up for me?" Grace smiled, remembering the fierce protectiveness she'd felt. "How could I forget? You looked so lost, holding Lily and trying not to cry." "I was terrified," Ethan admitted, "not just about losing the job, but about failing her." He gestured toward his daughter, who was now squealing with delight as Daniel helped her climb onto a low slide. "I thought I'd messed up everything." "But you hadn't," Grace said firmly. "You were just trying your best, like all of us." She paused, watching Daniel carefully spot Lily as she went down the slide. "Sometimes our best looks messy to other people." Ethan nodded, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she'd come to recognize. "You know, when you told me who you really were that day, I thought it was too good to be true." Things like that don't happen to guys like me. Guys like you? Grace turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. You know what I mean, he shrugged. Single dads working paycheck to paycheck, barely keeping it together. That's not how I saw you, Grace said quietly. I saw a father who loved his daughter so much he'd risk everything to take care of her. That's the kind of person we need more of in this world. The children's laughter echoed across the playground as they started gathering leaves into piles. Daniel showed Lily how to sort them by color, his patience remarkable for a 9-year-old. The store's different now, Ethan said. People actually smile when they come to work. Yesterday, Sarah brought her sick son in because her babysitter canceled, and nobody blinked an eye. He colored quietly in the break room while she worked her shift. Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. That's exactly what I wanted. A place where families don't have to choose between being good parents and good employees. You did that? Ethan said softly. You fought for all of us. We fought together, Grace corrected him. When you came back to that town hall meeting, I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, he admitted. I was packed and ready to leave town that morning, but then Lily woke up crying, and as I held her, I realized I couldn't teach her to run away from things that matter. A cool breeze swept through the park, sending another cascade of leaves tumbling down. Daniel and Lily were now working together to build what looked like a leaf castle, their heads bent close in concentration. Sometimes I still can't believe how everything turned out, Grace said. Those board meetings were brutal. They called me emotional, unstable. But you were right, Ethan interrupted. And you were strong. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. I didn't feel strong. Most nights I'd put Daniel to bed and then cry myself to sleep, wondering if I was destroying everything my father built. Hey, Ethan's voice was gentle. You made it better. You took a good business and gave it a heart. They watched as Daniel showed Lily how to make a leaf crown, carefully weaving stems together. The little girl's face lit up when he placed it on her head, making her feel like a princess. You know what the hardest part was? Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Doing it alone. Every decision, every fight, it all felt so heavy. But you're not alone anymore, Ethan said. No, Grace agreed, watching their children play. I'm not, Daniel called out, waving them over to see the leaf castle they'd built. As they stood up from the bench, Lily ran toward them, her leaf crown slightly askew, golden leaves trailing behind her like tiny shooting stars. Daddy, Grace, look what we made, she exclaimed, grabbing both their hands to pull them forward. Ethan gently took Grace's hand as they let Lily lead them toward the leaf castle. Grace felt tears well up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't from sadness or fear. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders truly lift. She wasn't just the tough business owner anymore, the widow trying to prove herself, or the single mom carrying the world alone. She smiled through her tears, squeezing Ethan's hand as their children ran ahead, leading the way to their carefully constructed fortress of autumn leaves. The morning sun painted the storefront in warm golden hues as Grace and Ethan stood hand in hand before the newly renovated entrance. Above them, a fresh banner rippled in the gentle breeze. Family first always. The letters, crafted in welcoming blue and gold, seemed to shimmer with promise. Daniel and Lily sat on a nearby bench, sharing a blueberry muffin from the store's new in-house bakery. At 6 years old, Daniel had taken his role as Lily's protector seriously, carefully breaking the muffin into toddler-sized pieces for her. Lily, now almost 2, giggled as crumbs dotted her pink dress. Ready? Grace squeezed Ethan's hand, noting how his fingers trembled slightly against hers. She understood his nervousness. This wasn't just a store reopening, it was the beginning of their shared dream. With you? Always. Ethan's smile reached his eyes, erasing the last traces of the defeated man she'd met months ago. The parking lot was already filling with families, many carrying homemade welcome signs. Grace recognized faces from the protests, supporters who'd stood by them during the darkest days. Mrs. Chen from the alteration shop next door had brought her grandchildren. The Martinez family, regulars since the store first opened, waited near the front with flowers. At exactly 9 o'clock, Grace stepped forward to cut the ribbon. Ethan stood beside her, one arm around her waist, the other holding Lily, who had toddled over to join them. Daniel pressed close to Grace's side, his small hand clutching the edge of her blazer. "Welcome, everyone," Grace's voice carried across the crowd, strong and clear. "This isn't just a grocery store anymore. It's a testament to what happens when a community stands together." She paused, looking at the families gathered before her. "Every parent here knows the challenge of balancing work and family. From today forward, this store, and every store in our chain, will honor that balance." Applause erupted as she cut the ribbon. Ethan kissed her cheek, and Lily clapped her tiny hands in delight, mimicking the crowd. Inside, the transformation was evident. A bright play area occupied one corner, supervised by qualified staff for customers' children. The break room had been expanded into a comfortable space where employees could rest or tend to their kids during emergencies. New nursing stations provided privacy for mothers, and flexible scheduling boards displayed family-friendly shifts. Throughout the morning, Grace and Ethan greeted customers together, moving through the aisles as a family. They stopped often to chat, Lily waving from Ethan's arms while Daniel proudly showed people the new features he'd helped choose, like the lower shelves that kids could reach and the wider aisles that easily fit strollers. "Remember when we first met right here?" Grace gestured to Register 3, where months ago she'd witnessed Ethan's lowest moment. "How could I forget? You were my guardian angel that day." He pulled her closer, their children between them. "Though I never imagined my guardian angel would end up being my boss and my wife." Grace laughed, the sound carrying through the store like music. "And I never thought defending a stranger would lead me to my soulmate." The day passed in a blur of joy and celebration. Customers shared stories of how the store's new policies had changed their lives. Single parents spoke of finally feeling supported. Young families praised the child-friendly atmosphere. Even former critics admitted the changes had created something special. As evening approached, Grace found Ethan in their shared office, reviewing the day's success. "The kids are getting tired," she said softly. "Time to head home?" Home. The word still felt new and wonderful. They'd moved in together just last week, merging their families into a cozy house 3 blocks from the store. The transition had been surprisingly smooth, as if their lives had been meant to fit together all along. They gathered their sleepy children and drove home in comfortable silence. Daniel had insisted on sitting next to Lily's car seat, keeping watch over his sister, even as his own eyes drooped. Grace caught Ethan's glance in the rearview mirror, sharing a smile at their children's bond. At home, they moved through their bedtime routine with practiced ease. Grace helped Daniel with his pajamas, while Ethan changed Lily into her favorite unicorn onesie. They met in Daniel's room, where both children had insisted on hearing their bedtime story together. Ethan's voice was soft and warm as he read, "Good night, Moon." Lily curled in his lap while Daniel snuggled against Grace. By the final page, both children were drifting off. They carefully tucked Daniel into his race car bed, then carried Lily to her crib in the adjacent room. Standing in the doorway between their children's rooms, Grace leaned back against Ethan's chest. His arms encircled her waist, and she felt his chin rest gently on her shoulder. Through the soft glow of night lights, they could see both their children sleeping peacefully. "We're not just surviving anymore," Grace whispered, her heart full of gratitude. "We're finally living." Ethan's arms tightened around her, and she felt him nod against her shoulder. Together, they watched their children sleep, their shared silence filled with the quiet joy of a family made whole through love, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Grace Thompson, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.